There's all kinds of different personality types in the world, right? And I was thinking while Jason was talking about, when you were given an assignment in school, like you had to have a paper done by a certain day, and they gave it to you like a month out, 3 weeks out. Hey, by December 21, this paper is due. And a certain personality type would run home and jump. That'd be you, Steve. Jump. Oh, that'd be Karen. Somehow, yeah. I can picture that. But some personality types would run home and get busy and start the research and others, however, on December 20th would pull it out and say, we're going to make this happen, right? There's a question we're going to jump to all the way at the end of the message, but I'm going to throw it out there now. It's question number 1 in that list, Ray. But if you only had 48 hours left to live, what would those days be filled with? What would they look like? Because you may think that's a cheesy youth group question, so to speak. Well, why don't you do it then? But that's really not the intent. The intent is just simply to, for a brief moment, tweak our perspective of how we think time works. You see, because if I could actually honestly engage in that question, then what happens is I'm saying, I'm recognizing my mortality. I'm actually saying, one of these days, that's going to be a pertinent question for me. Now, when you're 22, that doesn't even enter your mind. You go, oh, 48. I got 48 hours. I got 48 years left to live. Why would I entertain such a dumb question as that? Well, that sounds good, but I'd like to see the guarantee.
It's another way of asking what matters most, right? It's just another way to try to get us to think what really matters. And that's actually what we've titled this message, because it seems like that's what Paul is getting to.
Right.
He's getting down to what matters most. Right? We're not going to go off on little tangents about words and the size of the Old Testament temple. I'm going to tell you this is what matters most.
So Timothy's name means one who honors God. Something about Timothy was unique. His mother had named him that. Paul starts off in 2 Timothy. We're going to start it actually in the first chapter of the second book. There's 2. There's Timothy 1 and Timothy 2. And he says, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God, in keeping with the promise of life that is in Christ Jesus, to Timothy, my dear son, grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and Jesus Christ our Lord. Timothy, I thank God whom I serve as my ancestors did with a clear conscience. Night and day, I constantly remember you in my prayers. Recalling your tears, I long to see you, that I would be filled with joy. So Paul's hope is that he's going to see this young man. And the young man, historically, Timothy is in his mid-20s, or maybe late 20s right here. But most historians believe he had not gotten to his 30th year yet. He said, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois, in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also. Isn't it interesting that Paul somehow knew not only Timothy, but Timothy's mother and Timothy's grandmother? And Paul reminds this 20-something of the faith that had been handed off to him. In fact, better said, had been handed down to him through the generations. So Paul is speaking in the context of 3 generations of Christianity. He's reminding Timothy, I believe, of the gift that he'd been given. How many people in this room, your faith was handed down to you by your parents, people directly above you? Let's just see. That's interesting. How many had grandparents that was handed down to them? Your grandparents gave it. And how about great-grandparents? That's amazing. If you've ever heard Peter Ilian and John Ilian's story of their father and their parents who marched across a Soviet Union. There's a lot of time zones in the former Soviet Union. If you're not a geography person, check it out. They marched not from west to west, but from west to east. And the price they paid to hold on to the faith and then pass down to their sons, who passed down to their sons. And what a gift that is. And Paul's saying, he's reminding Timothy, you've been given a gift here. Don't squander that.
Honestly, that inheritance is so important. And I think that that third generation is maybe the trickiest, honestly, because we can understand the stories of grandma and grandpa, but we can't exactly relate to them. You know what I mean? Like, it's one thing to understand, like, yeah, I get that you did that, but I've never lived that. I don't know what it's like to come out of Egypt like you did, to really just come from that to this, to have no inheritance. And it's a trickier thing to own that for ourselves. But Paul is speaking to a young man, Timothy, who he says in his own words has a sincere faith. So it's not just I have a tradition of Christianity and I'm just living in the tradition. Traditions are great, but he has something sincere that he owns for himself, and Paul recognizes that, and he's going to encourage him as we go on what to do with that. How do you handle the faith that you've been handed? And how do we pass it on to other men? Because honestly, we've run discipleship programs and done all kinds of stuff, and several of them we've called, titled, it came from you, the Timothy Project. Why do we say that? Why do we call it the Timothy Project? Because Paul is handing off something to a younger man. He's giving him something that maybe Timothy couldn't have on his own. But because of Paul's experience in life, he's able to give it to him. And then his charge to Timothy is, now you take this and you give it to other faithful men.
I believe that's the danger we face today. How many in here are just curious, you're the first generation out of Egypt? You're the first generation Christian. So your faith was yours. So you've actually been on both sides of this fence. You've been in Egypt. You understand what I mean by that? You've been in slavery. You were rescued, and you're the first. And so now you're the first one handing it off to your sons and your daughters. The handoff, obviously, is the most important part. And I think there's a great danger today in not recognizing the gift. An inheritance doesn't necessarily guarantee anything. I've seen people inherit large sums of money and blow it in less than 6 months. I've been around people that have inherited significant sums of money. It wasn't me. I wouldn't probably be here, but no, just kidding. I'd be podcasting from the Bahamas. No. And that money has disappeared. That money has disappeared. It's been squandered, wasn't invested, wasn't even actually spent wisely. It was just squandered. And how much more important is our faith that endures for all of eternity. So Paul is going to go from there into the second part of today, which is a series of kind of warnings and encouragements, so to speak. He's going to warn Paul that, hey, Timothy, we are living in dangerous days, but your days are going to be even more dangerous. So Paul's going to recognize the context of what they struggle with. He's in jail. His days are numbered. But it's almost like he's looking at his son going, I want to prepare you, Timothy, for what's coming. So he says, the time will come, 2 Timothy 4, when people will not put up with sound doctrine. The time's going to come, Timothy, when people instead, to suit their own desires, will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. So Paul, one of the main things he begins with is, Timothy, there's going to be a lot of weird doctrine floating around that is not going to be, it's going to be attractive in the sense of, oh, that's what I want to hear. I don't want to hear the hard things. I want to hear what appeals to my human nature. So much so that Paul's going to say they're myths. They're not even rooted in truth or reality, but they sound so good and they're so appealing that there's going to be a large number of followers.
He goes on and says, these are things you are to teach and to insist on. Now, we're not, today isn't about sound doctrine. We're not going to give it to you today, but I'm saying if you look in Timothy, that Paul has told him there are certain things that belong in the gospel and there are some things that do not belong in the gospel, and you need to know the difference between the two. So pay attention to the things that belong in the gospel that are sound teaching or sound doctrine. Devote yourself to these things. Eliminate the things that are not. He says, he goes on, if anyone teaches otherwise and does not agree with sound instructions of the Lord Jesus Christ and to godly teachings, they are conceited and understand nothing. Paul doesn't pull any punches. They have an unhealthy interest in controversies and quarrels about words that result in envy, strife, malicious talk, evil suspicions, and constant friction between people of corrupt mind, who have been robbed of the truth and who think that godliness is a means of financial gain. And that, go on, this is written before anyone was, in our generations, we're thinking about a prosperity gospel. He's saying there's this in men that we're gonna want to take godliness and figure how does this benefit me? Which is the antithesis to the cross. And he goes on to say this, here's the opposite spirit of that. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Wasn't that just the spirit of last Friday? Right? Just godliness and contentment. All I need is, just a full stomach and a change of clothes and I'll be fine.
I don't need to go to the Woodburn Outlet Mall.
Yeah, I don't need to camp out overnight to get the best deal on a widescreen TV, This is some of the most countercultural stuff you're going to hear. And we pass over it as if, well, maybe that was something, then, but that's not for us now. And we do this to the poverty of our souls. We are richer than anyone has ever been. We are so unbelievably wealthy, and at the same time, so unbelievably poor.
If you've ever been to on a missions trip to a foreign country that maybe what used to be called the third world or developing nation, that's one of the things that shocks you, is you'll see a group of boys, 8 years old, playing with an old rusty bike wheel for hours. For hours, There's this sense of they've found some wealth without the wealth, so to speak. Listen to what Paul says. Now, this isn't a bash money message,
no.
but try to understand where he's coming from. He says, and he fleshes it out. He says, the problem is, in verse 9, those who want to get rich, those who chase after wealth for wealth's sake, fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Plunge people into ruin and destruction. Now listen, I'm not saying I don't think poor people are any more spiritual. I've seen greed and covetousness with money and without money. You don't need money to be greedy. And just because you don't have money doesn't mean you're not greedy. Because what Paul is describing is something that has happened to the heart. It's not about the money in the hand, it's about the attitude of the heart. And here's what he says in verse 10. For the love of money, not money, and you've heard plenty of messages on this, is the root of all kinds of evil. So Paul's talking about the attachment, the direction my heart is facing. It's the love of money, the love of the acquiring of wealth. Why is that? Because money and wealth have power. And if you don't believe that, just wait till somebody near to you dies and leaves an inheritance and watch how many relatives show up, right? If you don't, money has power. A friend of mine just yesterday, I was having a conversation. He's starting a business with one of his best friends. And he was talking about it. I said, whatever you do, get it in writing. No, we're best friends. Yeah, get it in writing. Oh, we're believers, both brothers in Christ. Yeah, get it in writing. Why is that? I said, look, I have nothing. I don't even know who your friend or your future partner is. What I'm saying is what I know about this, that money changes things, doesn't it? Money changes something. Why is that? Because it has a power in and of itself. It has an attraction to it. And Paul says some people, it's plunged into ruin. It's plunged into ruin. It's eager for money, have wandered from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many griefs. I wish I was in missions for 15 years. Probably get tired of hearing that. But if I had $10 for every person who said they were going to go start a business to support missions, I wish I had $10 for every person who told me that. And I never heard from them again. Good intent, great idea. But somewhere along the way, something changed. And I never saw them again. And so this and not to mention the incredible ungodliness that is around money and the acquisition of wealth today, the crime that it fuels.
he wants to give another warning to his son here. And this one isn't just about the allure of the world, but it's about the hardness in the world. He says, the Spirit clearly says that in later times, some will abandon their faith and follow deceiving spirits, things taught by demons. Such teachings come through hypocritical liars whose conscience has been seared as with a hot iron. Ouch. Right? Anybody ever, touched a hot stove? How many times do you have to do it? You should learn. But there's something that we can do that we want to move towards pleasure, and the conscience is what the scripture's talking about here. The conscience that says no, don't do that. But we want it enough that we go against our conscience. Even that thing that's telling us, let's not do this, this is a bad idea, but I want it, it's pretty. And so we move towards it, and the first time we kind of feel bad about it, but the second time we don't feel as bad. And the third time it barely even registers. And by the fourth time we're like, why did I ever feel bad about this? I don't feel bad about this at all. Matter of fact, I can't remember why this is wrong. And that what happens there is it's such a beautiful word picture, a seared conscience as with a hot iron. Just think of a steak going on a grill, only that part of you that's supposed to be alive is being burnt up and killed. You can almost hear it, can't you? Right?
The Greek word is actually from the word cauterized. That hardened, that seared is from where we get that word cauterized, where they seal a blood vessel with electronic fire. Not only can your conscience be seared as an individual, but I believe your conscience, a nation's conscience, can be seared. You look at some of the things that are going on in our nation today. A little pop culture history here. You know that 50 years ago, or was more than that now, in the late 1950s, when Elvis Presley broke on the scene with this new style of music called R&B or rock and roll, they would actually put him on black and white television, believe it or not. It was black and white. There was no color. We don't know how we lived back then, but there was no color. And they would only show him from the waist up. The camera would only show him from the waist up because his hips were too suggestive to be on television. I know, that sounds random. So you can imagine if we were to take what you can see today, transport it back to 1957. Yeah, there'd be people thinking the world, literally, the Antichrist had shown up and was coming to an end.
Your grandma would pass out.
Yeah, she would have just, yeah. And now, how is it possible that a nation allows 1 million babies a year to be murdered in abortion mills? And the perversion and the sexuality that's become normal because an entire nation has had a conscience seared as with a hot iron. Listen, your conscience is your friend. It may not seem like a very kind friend at times, kind of a bothersome friend, but my conscience is my friend, because once you lose your conscience, you're in a very, very, very dangerous spot.
Paul actually paints a wonderful picture of exactly what it looks like to lose that friend in the conscience, to just ignore it and blow past it. It says, mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Listen, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. Having a form of godliness, but denying its power. Have nothing to do with such people. This is unreal. I mean, I feel like he's just describing the presidential race this year. I'm not even joking. I mean, just read it over and flip through the news and see, like, how much is this describing the world that we live in today? People who have blown past their conscience. They can actually laugh at grandma and grandpa's, conscience. Like, you guys don't even understand. You think, I'm telling you, this is the way it's going now. This is fine now. This is going to be okay. And somehow we've stopped devoting ourselves to sound teaching, sound doctrine. We've seared our conscience, and the things that our conscience used to say is bad, now we can't even remember why it's wrong. It doesn't feel wrong. It doesn't feel wrong because your ability to feel has been seared, has been cauterized.
There's a phrase there I want to call your attention to. He says, having a form of godliness. The word there in the Greek is is the husk that the larva has left behind. You know, larva butterfly, that's a future butterfly, is a worm of some kind. I'm not a biologist, but it's inside of this husk, and it germinates and grows until the place where it squeezes out and takes off and never comes back. And if you were to look, it leaves behind its shell. So Paul is saying there will be a group of people in the last days who will have a shell of godliness, but there's no power anymore in their lives.
The living thing, the spirit thing is gone.
Yeah, what was alive is gone. It's just a dead tradition. It's just maybe an intellectual agreement with some truth, but there's no power to obey it.
And listen, we're lying to ourselves when we say this isn't us at times, because we even use words like this. I'm just going through the motions, right? I'm just going through the motions. I haven't heard from God in a long time. I haven't, and we tend to want to blame that stuff on Him. God's not speaking. God's not there. Listen, God has not cauterized Himself. It's not Him. All right, who moves, the dock or the boat? It's the boat that wanders from the dock. The dock is fixed. God is fixed in His goodness. God is fixed in His love. God is fixed in His mercy. We move away from Him. We hurt our own conscience. We move away from Him, and we no longer know how to find our way back, like a ship lost in the fog. And the cross is that beacon that we need to orient on, that place of ultimate feeling, ultimate suffering, ultimate that we look to and we say, I've done something wrong here. And that's exactly what Paul is speaking to his spiritual son Timothy. As he warns them about this hardness that can happen in men's heart, he pushes him towards a tenderness. Listen, Timothy, my son, I'm giving you this command in keeping with the prophecies once made about you, so that by recalling them, you may fight the battle well, holding on to, where others have abandoned their faith. I want you to hold on to faith and a good conscience, which some have rejected and so have suffered shipwreck with regard to their faith. You hear the word picture there? They've been lost somehow at sea. They've lost their orientation. You need to hold on to your faith and a good conscience. Listen, a good conscience can actually be a real pain in the side sometimes, right? It can really hurt. Like this last week, I said something I shouldn't have said. I knew it the moment it came out of my mouth that I shouldn't have said it. You weren't even there.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Well, you might have heard some other stuff I said. And 2 days later, my wife was very gracious. It took 2 days before she said, you know, when you said that, and I knew immediately what she was talking about. And it wasn't on her. I didn't say something about her, but she was in the room when it happened. And she said, you know, when you said that, and immediately my conscience went, yeah, I know. I don't want to hear about it, please. I already feel bad about it. I don't want to talk about it. I feel terrible about what I did. And I just want to just push it away. I don't want to feel it. And that night I had to. I'm like, God, I can't do this. I can't live with this on my conscience. It's hurting me. What do I do? What practical thing do I do? I'm asking you for forgiveness. Is there something else that I need to do too, that I can have a clean conscience? Because I don't like this feeling. This hurts. And that's what Paul is pushing his son Timothy towards. Don't ignore that. Listen to that. That's there for your good. That's there for your life.
You know, they call it medication for a reason. We live in a culture that celebrates medication. Now, I'm not against. I mean, there's times where I get medication, right? But isn't it amazing that our culture is in the last 6 to 10 months has just been celebrating this idea. Now we're free to, and there's one more legal drug that's been added. It's an opiate, folks. And my dad would say they call it dope for a reason, right? But my point is it. Rather, it medicates, it softens, it hides the pain, when really sometimes the way out, the way back to truth, the way back to life is through pain. And by deadening it, I just stay in this weird, medicated state of unreality. Sometimes the best things in life, this sounds so old right now, the best things in life are actually through the pain and not around it. I want to feel. Because that's what we've lost. We've lost the ability to feel. And all the cutting in the world, and all the medication in the world, and all the good works in the world, and all I'll ring the Salvation Army bell in the world, it doesn't take away. It doesn't restore your feeling. It just prolongs the situation. Now, Paul's talking to Timothy, and he's painted kind of a bleak picture. So the natural thing maybe would be, I just want to hide little Timothy. Timothy, I don't want you to go through any of this. Let's just pray that Jesus comes back quickly and we don't have to experience any of this awful thing. No, you know what he does? He's going to now encourage Timothy to move towards the fight rather than run away from it. He's going to encourage Timothy, you need to find out who you are and where God has put you on the wall in this thing. Listen to what he says, Timothy, 1 Timothy 6:20, guard. You're going to hear a bunch of verbs here. Guard what has been entrusted to your care. Turn away from. So play offense, Timothy. Guard what's been entrusted to your care. Play defense. Turn away from godless chatter and the opposing ideas of what people call knowledge, which some have professed and have departed from the faith. Timothy, don't let anybody look down on you because you're young. Don't create lame excuses of why this isn't for you right now. Timothy, set an example for the believers. Where? In speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. Until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of Scripture, preaching and teaching. Do not neglect your gift, which was given to you through prophecy when the body of elders laid their hands on you. Be diligent in these matters. It's an interesting phrase. Be diligent. Give yourself wholly to them so that everyone may see your progress. Timothy, watch your life and your doctrine closely. Here's another word, persevere in them. Because if you do, you'll save both yourself and your hearers. You know, in my life, momentum is a big thing. That may sound a little random, but think about momentum. Momentum is movement. In my life, I have seen both the power of momentum. Paul's going to go into something here. He's going to use another metaphor of fire, but there are certain things that I do that push me towards godliness. And as I throw fuel on that fire, right, that godliness, that sense grows. There are other things that I do that push me away. And there's momentum on both sides. Momentum is a powerful thing. Movement is a powerful thing. Paul's he's gonna throw another metaphor out.
Listen, for this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. Isn't that awesome? Listen to that. Fan into flame, that picture. Have you ever been in a situation where you were in a house or maybe you were camping and the only heat was a stove? The only heat was actual fire? What happens if you just let that die? Well, you wake up to a really cold room, huh? And it's a little bit harder to get up and actually take care of it. You kind of just want to stay under the covers. You don't want to move. It kind of makes you immobile in a way. Or even more so if you are outside underneath the stars, that fire goes out and you just wake up and you're like, I think I'm getting hypothermia. It's a lot easier to work with a fire that's already been started, that's already going, to fan that into flame and to just add fuel to it, right? What you add fuel to is where you're going. That momentum piece that Bruce was just talking about, this is everything. Starting from a stone cold dead room, you don't want to get there. You don't want to be in that place because it's really hard to get it going again. You ever watch one of those Survivor programs where they're all with a stick and I know I've seen this on TV, but I can't get it to work. There's been something deposited. It says twice now. It says something about laying on of hands of Timothy and a prophecy and older men and people that have been around him that handed something off to him that Paul is calling a gift. It's been put inside of him. But now that the gift is in him, he has a responsibility, right, to stoke it. He has a responsibility to keep it, to be a keeper of the flame. So how much responsibility do we take for that? Or do we look around to others to say, well, no one's fanning my flame, man. No one's encouraging me.
Here's a practical question. What habits do I have in my life that actually accomplish that? Mm-hmm. What habits do I have in my life that actually fan into flames, that blow on the embers of my faith? And on the other hand, what habits do I have that pour water on it? I could look around at my friends, the people who have access to my life. I could look at my free time and how I spend it. I could look at my wealth or my money and how I use it. I could look at the gift that I have. Now, I've been in this for 30 some years, and I have a pretty good grasp, I think, on what I'm supposed to be doing. And I want to tell you, when I stop doing that, I get into trouble. Paul's saying, Timothy, I'm assuming you know what your gift is, because when we laid hands on you and the Spirit prophesied over you, it was given to you, Timothy. You have this gift. Preach the word, be instant in season, teach the word, he's saying. When we drift from our gift and we're out here playing somewhere else, listen, you're in a very vulnerable spot. There's something powerful about finding out what you're gifted to do, and everybody is gifted to do something. So sometimes I think the mentality is, well, oh yeah, you're gifted to be a pastor. That's the only gifts there are? No, that's not true at all. Everybody's gifted to do something. There's something that you're wired uniquely for, and you're gifted to do that no one else can do. And maybe it's not preaching or teaching. Maybe it's you're a nurse and your gift is compassion, or you're a teacher, your gift is education, or maybe your gift is not people, but you're gifted to be in an office alone with numbers and make them balance. Everybody has a gift because God's not a stingy God. What father would not recognize giftings in his kids? See, Paul's saying you've got to fan it though. The gift in and of itself isn't enough.
I just want to point out something here before we move on. And that is that the prophecy is not the fulfillment. Twice now he said something about something's been given to you, almost in a prophetic way. You've been spoken to about this gift. It's been handed off to you. Listen, the prophecy is not the fulfillment. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to young ministers or young people that have some sort of a calling, whether it's in ministry or in a workplace, and they've been told something, they've been given a word of God. This is what you're to do. This is an assignment that you have. This is what's going to happen in your life. And they just sit back passively waiting for it to happen as if it's already been fulfilled. That is not the word that Paul is giving to his son, Timothy. You've been given something. Now you have the responsibility to do something with it. I don't know, man. I was told I was gonna be this amazing teacher, that I was gonna speak before nations. And that was years ago, and nothing's happened. Well, what have you done with that? Did you hone that gift? Did you pay attention to sound doctrine? Did you go to a Bible school? Did you start practicing and speaking in small groups and others? No, I haven't. I've just been waiting for it to happen. Well, then I have no hope for it to ever happen.
Paul's going to come to an end here, and he's going to talk about finishing well. In 1 Timothy 6, he says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant or to put their hope in wealth. He's talking about finishing well. Now, this is not an anti-money message, not an anti-rich message. Don't miss the point here. He's talking about what is the meaning, what is the definition of real success? Paul says, because there will be people who will put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. If you don't believe wealth is uncertain, you need to kind of talk to some people who were around in 2008 or 2009 when the last time the economy crashed. Right? And they lost businesses and they lost retirements and they lost this. Or maybe you've got a grandfather who lived through the Great Depression. You want to talk about how uncertain wealth is. And if you don't believe wealth is uncertain, then you truly are not even in the ballpark. Paul said, be careful, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything we need for our enjoyment. Isn't that interesting? He doesn't just say sustenance, he says our enjoyment. God's not anti-wealth. God has all the wealth in the world. God invented the idea of wealth. He gave us the ability to create wealth. So God's not anti-wealth. What he's after is he's not anti-God. He lives for his own glory. God exists for his own glory. And in his glory, we find enjoyment. And God's not a stingy God either. He's given us everything we need. Command people, he says, however, to be rich in good deeds and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, it's not your bank account that gets you in. You will lay up a treasure for yourself and a firm foundation for the coming age so that we would take hold of what is truly eternal life. Everybody in this room, sorry, not to be depressing here, you're going to come to the 48 hours at some point. And I've been around as a pastor, a lot of people who are facing the last 48 hours of their life. And oftentimes it's a very difficult time because we're grieving and we're saying goodbye but I'll tell you, the greatest grief is looking back at a life and wondering, what did I do? In the last 48 hours of their lives, I've never had anybody ask to drive the Beamer up one more time. Let me just see the car. Let me see the diplomas. Let me bring those high school trophies. We won the state championship. No one takes comfort in that in their last days. No one. It's dust, it's vanity, it's vapor. But what I see people is reaching out for time. Oh, I wish I had a little more time. Oh, I wish I could turn back the clock and do this differently. Oh, I wish the kids were here. I wish my ex would talk to me one more time. Oh, I wish I had just one more opportunity. Paul's saying, you don't want to get to the end. And then he says these words. I believe these are the most telling words of both the books. I'm being poured out like a drink offering, and the time of my departure is near. He's using a metaphor of an Old Testament sacrifice where the first fruits of the harvest would be brought to the priest. Normally people would tithe to the priesthood for the support of the temple and the priesthood. In this case, they would bring their tithe in the form of a crush, the first crush of grapes. They would pray over it, bless it, and then the priest would pour it into the dirt as a symbol, as a statement. Everything we have came from God through the dirt, and everything we have goes back to God through the dirt. We were born from the dust, and to the dust we return. It was a sense of our mortality and God's eternity. And Paul says, I'm being poured out. I fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. No regrets. And now there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day. Not only to me, but to all those who long for his appearing.
Now listen, there's a list here that's about to happen that might sound a little disjointed in some sense, but it's not. And there's great value in understanding what Paul's about to talk about here. As he runs through some practical things, he says, do your best to come to me quickly. He still has a hope that maybe Timothy's going to get to come and see him. And he wants to see him because winter's on its way for him. Winter is right around the corner. And he'd love it if Timothy could get there before then. It says, for Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. So he had someone who was there faithful. We'll talk about it in a second, but now he's deserted him, gone on to Thessalonica. Sessions has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you because he's helpful to me in my ministry. I sent Tychicus to Ephesus. When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas and my scrolls, especially the parchments. Alexander the metalworker did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will pay him for what he's done. You too should be on your guard against him because he strongly opposed our message. There's a message in these few words about two people. Really about a few, but there's two we'd like to point out. That first one, Demas. Demas was there. He was faithful for a while, and we don't know why exactly, but for some reason he deserted Paul and he left. And maybe it was because the going got rough and things started getting hot, and this isn't like before, when I was with Paul before, he was, speaking and there was miracles but now I don't want to join Paul in prison. And he left for Thessalonica. He took off. And it doesn't make you wonder, what was in Thessalonica that had a draw to him? What was there? Was it a woman? Was it a job? Was it was it just comfort? Was that home? I don't know. But there's that pull for us, a love of the world that excludes us from ministry. There's a certain love of the world that will sideline you from ever really being able to be a part of what God has for you. And we've almost called that just old-fashioned, maybe grandparents' stuff. They didn't believe in worldly stuff, and they would rail against the movie theaters and stuff. But there's something to this that we can't just leave behind, or we leave behind at our own peril.
He says, get Mark and bring him with me. He's helpful to me in my ministry. Mark appeared that he wasn't going to finish well. We never hear about Demas again. We don't know whatever happened to him. Mark, however, had gotten in a big fight back in the book of Acts with Paul and Barnabas, and they'd parted ways. Paul refused to minister with Mark. He kind of kicked Mark off the team because Mark wouldn't pull his weight. Paul wrote him off, so to speak, said, you cannot go with us on the next missionary journey, on the second missionary journey. And so there's this falling out between men of God. And somewhere along the line, Paul gets word, apparently, that, you know what, Mark's come back. Mark's back on board. Mark's with us. Get him and bring him with you. Would you? He's helpful to me in the ministry. At my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them, but the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen. I love the verse, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. How many, ministry is a tough place. If you want to be in ministry and you think it's just going to be smooth sailing now that you're working with godly people, you're in for a surprise. Some of the most disappointing things in my life have been involved in ministry. Some of the most disappointing situations with people have been people that I surely thought would know better. Some of you could say that. Church has disappointed you. People who were supposed to know better have disappointed you. And so what you hear is this recognition that, hey, everybody deserted me. But listen to the next verse. May it not be held against them. Paul would not allow his life to end in bitterness. Yeah, they should have been there. They should have showed up. It should have worked out better. You should have kept your promise. You should have tried harder. You should have been more faithful. Paul understood all those things. But he says, I'm not going to hold it against them. This world owes me nothing. If you're waiting for the world to pay you back or to settle a score, then the world has a hold on you without your understanding or realizing it. This world, if you're waiting, I want to say it again, if you're waiting for the world to settle the score with you, to pay what you believe and what you actually may be owed. The bumper sticker, forgiveness is giving up any hope of a better past. To forgive is to give first. You owe me, I know you owe me, you know you owe me, but I'm going to give you first. I'm going to let you go. And Paul, in the last days of his life, lets the world and his colleagues off the hook. Some of us need to let people in our lives off the hook because we want to finish well. And you don't want your days to be consumed with waiting for the world to pay you back.
I just want to remind you, Paul's in prison. He has nothing. He literally has nothing. And he doesn't know what we know. Can I just remind you of that? He doesn't know what we know.
Oh my gosh.
He doesn't know the inheritance he's leaving behind. He doesn't know we're going to still be talking about Paul. Outside of God just giving him revelation of that this letter to one single person was going to be continued to be read over and over again for hundreds and hundreds of years by literally millions of people. He's just doing it out of faithfulness, not thinking that his name is going to be great at all. Matter of fact, feeling like maybe this was a huge defeat. Here I am in prison. I don't even have my own coat, right? I got nothing left. Everyone's deserted me. And he's still able to have a good conscience, to feel, right? Because bitterness will do that too. Bitterness is a way of feeling that actually leads to death. It's a different kind of searing in a way. It's a root that gets down into our life, and the fruit that comes out of that root is not good. But Paul is speaking about a different kind of fruit. There's fruit that is coming from his life, much of which he will never see. But by faith, he's looking forward to a better reward.
It makes you wonder, how do we define success for our own lives? Because everybody has a definition, whether you verbalize it or not, whether you're aware of it or not. And typically, in an ungodly world, that definition is somehow connected to numbers. How many square feet are in your house? How much money is in your PERS account? How many people do work for you? If you think that the church is immune to that kind of stuff, go to a pastor's conference. Oh, how many you got running? How many are you running on Sundays? How many staff do you have out there? It's all numbers. But if you were to look through the lens of Paul's life, he had no idea. All he did was remain faithful to the task that God had gifted him to do. Isn't that amazing? He wrote a letter to a 20-something, not knowing that it would endure for all generations. We don't know. So I can't live your life and you can't live mine. If God's gifted you with tons of wealth and tons of influence, I'm happy for you. But you're going to have to answer for that gift just like I'm going to have to answer for my gift. If God has gifted you with marriage and family, if God has gifted you with singleness, if God has gifted you with, and you may not think that's a gift, but listen, you can't live anybody else's life. We're going to finish. There's a quote out of a book that I've loved my whole life. It's called The Man in the Mirror by Patrick Morley. It's a short book written to men. He was a businessman who was ungodly and became a Christian, and his whole life was turned around. He had spent the first half of his life making millions, and the second half preaching the gospel to businessmen. He says this: failure is not to have attempted something and fallen short. Perhaps real failure is to succeed at something that ultimately doesn't matter. See what he's saying? He's looking through the lens of eternity and saying, listen, it's a different measure that we use. It's a different tape that we use. Don't allow the world to tell you that your life is measured by numbers. If you've got a lot of numbers in your life, awesome, enjoy it. And ask God where you're supposed to share it. Ask God why those numbers are in your hand. You know what I mean by that? If God has gifted you with numbers of wealth or opportunities or influence, the question is not what do I do with it? The question, it is in a way, but why has God gifted me with this, and how does he want to use it in his kingdom to further what I believe about eternity? Because we are not people of this world. We are citizens of another country. We are citizens of something deeper and bigger and farther than we can even get our minds around. So is what I'm playing with today, is it this world, or am I playing for all of eternity? Is what I'm striving for, is it just this world and numbers, or we're citizens of another country?
Listen just to some of his last words. In this gospel, I was appointed a herald, an apostle, and a teacher. He knows what his responsibility was, and he feels like he fulfilled it. It started on a road to persecution, but he had a supernatural calling. He says, that's why I'm suffering as I am. Yet this is no cause for shame, because I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him until that day. What has he entrusted to him? Everything. Literally everything. He's pushed everything into the kingdom. He's now in a prison cell, lacking even a coat and some parchments that he'd like to have. And he can honestly say, I'm ready to stand before the judge of all things and be held accountable for the gift that's been given to me. Because I know I have been faithful. Timothy, I want to know that you're going to be faithful. This is the gift that was entrusted to me, I now entrust to you. I'm leaving behind everything that I have with you. It's not silver and it's not gold. It's not anything but the gospel of Jesus Christ. Timothy, do right by this.
So if you only had 48 hours left to live, would it change the way you lived? I pray that you wouldn't wait till that moment to change the way you live. I do. I truly do as a pastor. If you call us your pastor, then I want to give you that advice. Please don't wait till the last 48 hours to change the way you live. Please don't cram for the test. Oh, I got to get busy. This is real. The writer of Tuesdays with Morrie says, everyone knows they're going to die, but nobody believes it. If we did, we'd do things differently. Another question I would ask is, if there was one person in your life who's gone now, and you could bring him back for an hour, what would that hour sound like? You hear my, and please don't check out on that question. You say, well, that's not even possible, but it's the lens again. It's looking through the lens. If there was somebody you could come bring back for an hour who's gone from your life now, in other words, it's too late, but you could, well, what would that conversation sound like? Would it be trivial? You only have 60 minutes? Or would you cut through all the stuff and get right to the heart? The reason I ask it is you can live on this side with that attitude. I can live in truth, and I can live outside the trivial, and I can go deep if I choose, if I see it correctly. Because I don't know. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know who holds it. And the last question is this: what about the words of Jesus? What does it profit a man to gain the whole world? To have all the money and all the sexual experiences anybody could experience and all the fame and lose his soul. What does that mean to me as a follower of Jesus? How does that affect my life? Paul would tell the church in Corinth, examine yourselves to see if you're in the faith. Examine your life. Examine. Man, that's a good thing. We're going to just finish with just a moment of reflection here. And Father, as we finish this morning and this afternoon now, just you have made us from the very beginning for eternity. And this life is a brief, short, feverish rehearsal. That someone said for a concert that we can't even stay to give. So, Father, you're a good Father, and we're your kids. You haven't taken us out of the world. You've left us here for a reason. Show us what that is this morning. Speak to us about course adjustments in our lives. Am I in the right place? Is my heart facing the right direction? Am I waiting and hoping for the right things? Do I live for your glory? Do I see the value of that glory? Will my children pick it up? Is it strong enough? Is my faith strong enough that my kids will pick it up? Those around me would be attracted to it. As you take a minute as we finish, just allow the Lord to speak to you this morning, would you?